control. That morning something inside me snapped. I didn't cry, I didn't run. I stood up. And now, the house, the voice, the freedom, they're mine. Let me show you how I reclaimed it all. The morning sun filtered softly through the gauzy curtains of the kitchen window, casting a golden hue on the familiar scuffed floor tiles and worn oak dining table. The house was still the kind of quiet that used to feel comforting. But today it was the kind of silence that screamed. Rachel Harper sat at the table, her fingers wrapped around a warm coffee mug, though she hadn't taken a sip. Her stomach churned. The bitterness of last night's argument still clung to the air, heavier than the scent of brewing espresso. Across the room, her husband Eric paced restlessly, each step on the creaky wooden floor echoing like thunder. He wasn't saying anything. Not yet. But Rachel could feel it building. The way his jaw was set. The tightness in his shoulders. He was simmering, and she knew she always knew when he was about to boil over. It had started like it always did with Melissa. Eric's younger sister had called again last night. Crying. Dramatic. Desperate. This time she needed money to cover a medical emergency. But Rachel had heard it before. The last emergency was a weekend shopping spree in New York, complete with designer handbags and bottomless brunches. And once again Eric had expected Rachel to hand over her credit card. She had said no. Calmly. Firmly. She had tried to explain again how they couldn't keep enabling Melissa's reckless spending. How she needed boundaries. How their own financial stability should matter too. That's when the yelling started. The accusations. You're selfish, you don't understand family, she's my sister. Rachel had gone to bed with the fight unresolved, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might bruise her ribs. She had barely slept. And now here they were, the cold light of morning shining too brightly on the pieces of a marriage she no longer recognized. Eric stopped pacing suddenly. He turned to face her, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep or maybe from rage. She's coming over today, he said, voice flat but dangerous. You'll give her your card. And you'll smile while you do it. Rachel's chest tightened. She met his gaze with steady defiance. No, she said. I won't. The word hung in the air between them like a crack of thunder. One syllable. One final fragile line in the sand. Eric's face flushed deep red. Are you seriously going to start this again? We never stopped. Rachel replied, her voice quiet but resolute. You just decided not to listen. Eric took a step forward. She's my sister, Rachel. She's family. And I'm your wife, she said, rising slowly to her feet. Or have you forgotten? He laughed, but it was a humorless, bitter sound. You've never understood. You don't have siblings. You don't know what it's like to carry that kind of responsibility. Rachel swallowed hard. His words weren't new, but they always stung. No, I don't have siblings, but I do understand responsibility. And I know that giving in to Melissa every time she snaps her fingers isn't helping her, it's just hurting us. She saw the muscle in his jaw twitch. His nostrils flared, and then in one horrifying instant he grabbed his own mug from the counter and hurled it across the room. Rachel didn't even have time to flinch. The scalding liquid hit her face and neck with a sizzling sting, soaking her blouse. The mug shattered on the floor, ceramic shards skittering across the linoleum like frightened insects. Pain flared instantly on her skin, and she gasped, stumbling back against the counter, her hands flying up to her cheek. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't speak. All she could hear was the ringing in her ears and Eric's voice now booming with unfiltered rage. You're going to pay for this, he spat. Melissa is coming here, and you're going to give her what she needs, or you can get the hell out. Rachel stared at him, stunned, her vision blurred not just from the pain but from the sheer disbelief of what had just happened. He had thrown coffee at her, not yelled, not slammed a door, not stormed off to cool down. He had taken a weapon, a hot liquid weapon, and thrown it at her face. The Rachel from 6 years ago, the one who laughed at Eric's dumb jokes in college, who dreamed of writing a book, who believed in the promises of love and partnership. She wouldn't have recognized the man standing before her now. And maybe she wouldn't have recognized the woman standing in her place either. Because somewhere along the way, Rachel had shrunk. She had bent and softened and silenced herself to keep the peace. To be the good wife. The easy one. The understanding one. But this was a line she couldn't erase. Eric stormed out of the house, slamming the door so violently that the frames on the hallway wall rattled. The vibration echoed long after he was gone. Rachel stood in the silence, her breath ragged, her hands shaking. Coffee dripped from her soaked blouse onto the floor. A thin dark puddle spread beneath her bare feet. The burn on her cheek throbbed in time with her pulse. She reached for a kitchen towel and pressed it gently to her skin, hissing softly at the contact. Then she moved slowly, numbly down the hallway and into the bathroom. She flicked on the light and looked into the mirror. For a moment she didn't recognize the reflection. A woman stared back, red cheek, hair matted with steam, and sweat, eyes wide and unblinking. A woman who looked exhausted, defeated, but also dangerously close to awake. Rachel dropped the towel and leaned in. "What have I become?" she whispered. Her voice cracked on the last word. And for the first time in years, she didn't reach for the excuse. She didn't tell herself he didn't mean it. She didn't wonder what she could have done differently. She just looked at herself and saw the truth. She was still here, still standing, but not for long. Rachel didn't leave that morning. She probably should have, she knew that. But trauma doesn't come with clarity. It clouds everything, wraps around your mind like fog until up feels like down, and abuse starts sounding like apology. Instead, she treated the burn on her cheek with a cold compress, cleaned up the shattered ceramic on the kitchen floor, and changed her clothes. She didn't cry. Not yet. The tears always came later, when she was alone, when no one could hear the shame rattling in her chest like broken glass. Eric didn't come back until late that evening. He walked in like nothing had happened. No flowers. No apology. Not even a look in her direction. Rachel stood in the hallway waiting, hoping against all logic that maybe he'd say, "I'm sorry. I lost control. I don't know why I did that." But he didn't. He walked straight past her and into the bedroom. That night, Rachel lay on the edge of the bed, curled up like a question mark, staring at the ceiling, wondering how many more pieces of herself she was allowed to lose before she disappeared altogether. She hadn't always been like this. 6 years earlier, she was a different woman. She had a fire in her chest, stories in her bones. She had just finished her MFA in creative writing and was preparing to pitch her first manuscript, a collection of short stories that danced between joy and grief, love and escape. It had been her dream since she was 10 years old. And Eric, he had been her biggest cheerleader. Back then, he was full of charm. He brought her coffee while she read her rough drafts aloud with animated voices, even created a spreadsheet to help her track agent submissions. He told her more than once, "You were born for this." But somewhere between the wedding vows and the mortgage paperwork, the encouragement turned into critique. "Do you really think anyone wants to read stories like that? You're spending a lot of time on something that doesn't even pay. Maybe it's time to get a real job." She'd laughed the first time. The second time, she'd tried to explain her process. The third time, she quietly closed her laptop and didn't open it again for a year. Eric said he missed her, that he felt like they were growing apart. He asked her to be more present, to cut back on time with friends, on coffee dates, book clubs, late-night writing sessions. He said he wanted to spend more time together, that it was about love. So she agreed. She let the group chats go silent, turned down invitations, stopped replying to texts from Claire, her college roommate who had once been like a sister. She told herself it was just a phase, a compromise, but it wasn't. It was erosion. Every time she bent a little, gave a little, quieted a little, she felt something inside her slip further away. And Melissa was always there to take up the space. Eric's sister was a storm. Blonde hair, big voice, loud presence. She swept into their lives like she owned them, borrowing money, borrowing clothes, even borrowing Rachel's time. Every crisis she had became Rachel's responsibility. And Eric expected her to support, to sympathize, to surrender. "She's all I have left," he'd once said, eyes glossy with nostalgia. "After Mom died, it's been me and her. We survived a lot, Rach." And how could Rachel argue with that? She understood loss. Her own parents were gone, lost in a car crash the year after she graduated college. She knew what it meant to cling to the people who remained. But grief isn't permission. It doesn't excuse entitlement. Still she tried. God, she tried. She played peacemaker, banker, babysitter to grown-up tantrums. Every time she set a boundary, Eric would twist it into betrayal. You just don't care about family. Why do you always make things harder? Why can't you just do this one thing? So she did. Again and again. Until one afternoon, 2 years ago, when Rachel sat alone in the back of a bookstore cafe, hands trembling over a cup of peppermint tea, her chest tight with something she couldn't name. It wasn't until the barista asked gently, "Are you okay, ma'am?" that she realized she wasn't. She wasn't okay. She was vanishing. And even then she hadn't left. Because where would she go? Her savings were minimal. She hadn't worked in years. Most of her friends had stopped reaching out. The manuscript she once believed in sat half-finished in an external hard drive buried in a drawer. Her self-worth had become so entangled with Eric's approval that she couldn't remember what it felt like to make a decision without first asking herself, will this upset him? So she stayed. Not out of love, but out of fear. Not out of hope, but out of habit. She clung to the good memories like they could save her their trip to Maine, where they danced barefoot in the surf. That first winter in their little townhouse, when they cooked too much soup and burned all the toast and still managed to laugh for hours. But those moments felt like postcards from a place she could never return to. The man who had once told her she was made of magic now looked at her like a nuisance, and yet she stayed, believing maybe one day he'd remember. Maybe if she was just a little more patient. A little more understanding, a little less herself. But no matter how quiet she became, it was never enough. And on that morning when the coffee hit her skin, when the sting seared through her and the towel pressed against her cheek, Rachel finally understood. This wasn't going to stop, it wasn't going to get better. Because she wasn't just living with a man who didn't love her. She was living with a man who resented her for surviving the parts of her he tried to kill. The silence after Eric left wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating. Like the air had been sucked from the walls and replaced with dread. Rachel stood in the kitchen for a long time, unable to move. Her damp shirt clung to her skin, the faint sting on her cheek reminding her this wasn't a dream. She wasn't trapped in some abstract fear anymore. The danger was real. It had a shape. A name. She pressed her palms against the edge of the countertop to steady herself. She had to go. Now. Not in a week. Not when Melissa was done leeching off their accounts. Not when Eric apologized because he wouldn't. She had crossed a threshold this morning, and on the other side of it was only fire. Rachel walked calmly to the bedroom. Her hands moved before her mind could second guess. She reached into the back of the closet and pulled out the old blue suitcase. The zipper was stiff from disuse. The wheels creaked as she rolled it out. From the top shelf, she pulled down a small gray lockbox, its surface dusty from years of hiding behind rarely used handbags. She opened it with trembling fingers and exhaled shakily when she saw what was inside. Bills folded in precise stacks tucked into envelopes marked grocery, utilities, emergency. She hadn't even remembered labeling them. She had started saving cash years ago, not because she thought she'd leave, but because some part of her knew she might have to. Rachel shoved the envelopes into the suitcase. A few pairs of jeans. Her worn leather journal. 2 soft cotton sweaters. Underwear, socks, her toothbrush. The simple, necessary things. Not the sentimental ones. Not yet. She didn't know if she was leaving forever. She just knew she couldn't stay another night in this house. And then with the suitcase by the door, she did the thing she should have done years ago. She picked up her phone, scrolled past the names she didn't recognize anymore, and found one that made her breath hitch. Claire Bennett. They hadn't spoken in almost 2 years. Not because of a fight, but because Rachel had let too much time pass, let too many invitations go unanswered. Claire had always been that kind of friend, the one who gave and gave even when you didn't know how to receive. And Rachel had pushed her away the same way she had everyone. Her thumb hovered over the call button. What if she doesn't answer? What if she's moved on? What if she doesn't want to hear from me after all this time? Rachel pressed the button anyway. The line rang once. Twice. Then, Rachel, her voice. Warm. Surprised. Concerned. Rachel didn't realize she was crying until she tried to speak and couldn't. The words dissolved in her throat. Rach, what's going on? Are you okay? No, Rachel whispered. I need help. That was all it took. Claire didn't ask 100 questions. She didn't guilt her. She didn't demand explanations. She just said, I'm coming to get you. Text me your address. I'll be there in 30 minutes. And she was. Claire pulled up in a silver SUV, still wearing yoga pants and a ponytail, 2 empty booster seats in the back. She stepped out of the car and wrapped Rachel in the kind of hug you don't realize you need until you're inside it. Rachel broke down. Right there on the front steps. She cried in a way she hadn't let herself in years, not a quiet weep, but a body-shaking, soul-emptying collapse. It's okay, Claire murmured, holding her tighter. You're safe now. They didn't talk much on the drive. Rachel stared out the window, clutching her suitcase like a lifeline, while Claire kept one hand steady on the wheel and the other reaching occasionally to touch her arm. The sun had dipped low by the time they pulled into Claire's driveway, a small, cheerful home with a tidy yard and a swing set in the back. The porch light was already on. Inside, the sounds of children's laughter and a television playing low filled the air. Claire led her inside, past the coats hung on hooks, the family photos, the smell of something cinnamon baking. This is home, Claire said softly. And tonight it's yours too. She gave Rachel the guest room, small, cozy, with a twin bed and a bookshelf lined with well-loved novels. A fleece blanket folded neatly at the foot of the bed. A nightlight plugged in by the wall. Rachel stood there for a moment, overwhelmed by the normalcy of it all. I don't want to disrupt your family, she whispered. Claire shook her head. Your family. Dinner was leftovers. Claire reheated in the microwave macaroni, some roasted vegetables, a piece of apple pie split between the two of them. Rachel barely tasted it. Her stomach was too knotted. Later, alone in the guest room, Rachel pulled on the clean pajamas Claire had given her and curled under the blanket. Her suitcase sat in the corner like a simple proof that she had done the unthinkable. She had left. She turned off the light, but sleep didn't come easy. Her body refused to relax. Every noise outside, the hum of a car, the creak of a floorboard, the faint sound of a child coughing, made her jolt. When she finally drifted off, the nightmares followed. She dreamed of Eric yelling, of coffee mugs flying like grenades, of Melissa pounding at the door demanding money. She dreamed she was running barefoot through the house, but the walls kept shifting, narrowing, closing in. No matter where she turned, she couldn't find the door. Rachel woke with a gasp, soaked in sweat. It was still dark. The nightlight glowed dimly against the far wall. She sat up, pressed her hand to her chest, and breathed. She wasn't there anymore. She was here. In a stranger's house that felt more like home than her own ever had. Free, terrified, but alive. And for the first time in what felt like forever, that was enough. The next morning, the sunlight in Claire's kitchen felt gentler than it had in a long time. Not the blinding kind that made Rachel want to crawl back under the covers, but the kind that warmed her skin and made her believe, if only faintly, that she had survived something. Claire poured coffee into a pale blue mug and slid it across the table. Drink this. We're meeting Sarah at 10. Rachel blinked. Sarah Thatcher, Claire said, already pulling out a folder from her purse. She's a lawyer. Smart, tough. She specializes in helping women get out of abusive relationships. Rachel hesitated, fingers curled around the warm mug. I don't know if I'm ready for that. I just left. I haven't even figured out what I want. Claire leaned forward. Rachel, you do know what you want. You just need someone to help you believe you deserve it. Her words sat in Rachel's chest like a stone, heavy, impossible to ignore. Sarah's law office didn't look the way Rachel expected. It wasn't cold or clinical. The waiting room had soft chairs, potted plants in every corner, and abstract paintings that looked like waves crashing gently into shore. The receptionist offered her tea. Rachel hadn't realized she was holding her breath until Sarah Thatcher stepped into the room. Tall, composed, and mid-40s, Sarah had a presence that didn't require raising her voice. Her gaze landed immediately on Rachel's cheek, still pink, where the coffee had scalded her, and something flickered behind her calm eyes. Anger. Compassion. Recognition. Rachel, she said gently, extending a hand. I'm Sarah. I'm really glad you came. Claire gave Rachel a small nod of encouragement before stepping back, letting the two women walk down the hallway together. Sarah's office was warm. Not just physically but emotionally. A bookshelf ran along one wall filled with legal texts and framed photos of Sarah's daughters. There were no degrees hanging like trophies, only a framed quote near her desk that read, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." Eleanor Roosevelt. Rachel sat down, clutching her hands together tightly in her lap. I've never done this before, she said. Sarah smiled. Most of my clients haven't. That's why I'm here. She didn't push. Instead, she asked Rachel to tell her story from the beginning. So Rachel talked, her voice shaky at first, then steadier. She told Sarah about Eric's temper, about Melissa's intrusions, about the years she'd spent apologizing for things that weren't her fault. About the morning he threw coffee in her face. Sarah listened without interruption, taking notes in a black leather-bound notebook. When Rachel finally fell silent, she expected judgment. Or maybe disbelief. What she got was kindness and steel wrapped in the same breath. What Eric did, Sarah said, is abuse. There's no soft version of that. Rachel looked down at her lap. He never hit me. Not really. Rachel, Sarah said firmly. He threw boiling liquid at your face. That's assault. The word hit her like a slap. Assault. She'd used 100 other words to describe what happened: an argument, a bad morning, a mistake. But never that one. Sarah leaned forward. I know it's a lot to take in. But if you're ready, we can file for divorce. Today. And we'll also petition for a restraining order. Rachel's chest tightened. A restraining order to protect you from future contact. If he tries to call you, show up at your work, send messages through Melissa, he'll be violating court orders. The idea made Rachel feel both relieved and terrified. Do you think he'll fight me? He knows the legal system. He knows people. What if he ruins me? Sarah sat back in her chair, folding her hands calmly. That's not your fear to carry anymore, she said. Let me carry it for you. Rachel's eyes filled suddenly, uninvited. Not because she was weak, but because someone had finally told her she didn't have to be strong alone. Sarah slid a document across the desk. This is the initial filing. Take your time, read it. We'll go at your pace. Rachel picked it up. Her name was typed in bold on the top line. Rachel Harper Campbell versus Eric Campbell. It looked surreal. Do you have any joint accounts? Sarah asked gently. Anything you'd need help freezing or separating? Rachel nodded. He added me to his credit cards. But most of the savings is in his name. Doesn't matter. We'll file a motion to protect marital assets. He won't be able to touch them until the court sorts things out. And we'll work on reclaiming your financial independence. Rachel swallowed. I don't have a job. You will, Sarah said without hesitation. There are programs. Grants. Safe housing if needed. But you're not starting from zero. You've already taken the hardest step. Rachel set the paper down and looked up. I'm scared, she admitted. Sarah smiled softly. Good. That means you understand the risk. But you showed up anyway. That's not fear, Rachel. That's courage. When they walked out into the parking lot, Rachel felt lighter, though no less shaken. She climbed into Claire's car and sat for a moment, gripping the edge of her seat. Claire handed her a protein bar and a bottle of water. I know that face, she said. You're doing the math. Rachel gave a hollow laugh. I'm thinking about Melissa showing up at the house today to find me gone. She'll probably pitch a fit, Claire said. But she can't scream her way past a court order. Rachel looked down at the water bottle in her hands, condensation dripping between her fingers. I didn't think I'd ever get here, she said softly. To this place. To this day. Claire reached over and gave her hand a squeeze. And you're still standing. Rachel closed her eyes for a long moment. Not broken. Not erased. Still standing. Rachel hadn't unpacked her suitcase yet. Something about it felt too permanent. Too hopeful. It sat in the corner of Claire's guest room like a quiet promise she wasn't ready to make. By the time the weekend rolled around, Rachel had started to breathe easier. She still woke up tense, still checked the locks twice before bed, but she no longer jumped at every sound. She even smiled when Emma Claire's 7-year-old daughter painted her a picture of Auntie Rachel flying away from a dragon castle. Rachel had laughed, but she also knew dragons didn't just give up. And neither did Eric. It was Sunday afternoon. Claire was folding laundry in the living room, the kids were playing outside, and Rachel was trying to lose herself in a book when the doorbell rang. 3 sharp, impatient chimes. Rachel's stomach dropped. Claire froze towel halfway to a drawer. The knock came again, this time heavier. Rachel didn't need to look through the window to know. "They're here," she whispered. Claire stood up, spine straightening like steel. "Stay back. Let me handle it." Rachel's heart thundered as she crept to the hallway. Through the narrow slit of the curtain, she saw Eric standing on the porch in his crisp power suit, the one he always wore when he wanted control. Beside him was Melissa, arms crossed, oversized sunglasses perched on her head, annoyance radiating from every inch of her. Claire opened the door just enough to block their view. "Well," she said coolly, "this is a surprise." "Cut the crap, Claire," Eric snapped. "Where is she?" "You mean Rachel?" Claire arched an eyebrow. "She's safe. And you're trespassing." "She's my wife," Eric said, trying to push the door open farther. "I have every right." "No," Claire cut in. "You don't." Melissa stepped forward, voice shrill. "This is ridiculous. She took off like some drama queen and left us hanging. Eric's been losing sleep, and you're hiding her like she's some fragile little bird. This has gone on long enough." Rachel stepped out before she could stop herself. "No," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "This has gone on long enough." Eric's head snapped toward her. "There you are," he said, relief and fury mixing into something toxic. "We need to talk. Alone." Claire moved instinctively to shield Rachel, but Rachel gently touched her arm and stepped forward. Her heart was pounding, but her voice held. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Eric." Melissa scoffed. "Oh, please. This is about a little coffee. You've blown this way out of proportion." Rachel felt something inside her snap, not with rage, but with finality. "You threw scalding coffee at me," she said, locking eyes with Eric. "And then told me to get out. So I did." Eric's jaw clenched. "We had a fight. It got out of hand. You made it worse by running off and dragging strangers into our marriage." "I didn't drag strangers," Rachel said. "I reached out to someone who actually cared." "You're my wife," Eric said, stepping forward. "You don't just walk away from that." "I already did." The air felt electric. Tense. Final. And then before anyone could speak again, a car door slammed. All heads turned as a sleek black sedan pulled up the curb. Out stepped a tall woman in a tailored gray blazer carrying a leather folder and a quiet authority. "Sarah." She walked calmly up the driveway, heels clicking against the pavement, and nodded politely at Claire before turning to Eric and Melissa. "Good afternoon," she said. "Eric Campbell, I presume." Eric blinked. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm Sarah Thatcher, legal counsel for Rachel Harper, and I'm here to inform you that Rachel has officially filed for divorce. Any further communication or contact must go through me." Melissa laughed. "What is this, a Lifetime movie?" Sarah's eyes didn't even flicker. "It's a legal process. One that you are both now part of." Eric's face went pale, then flushed. "You're not serious." "Oh, I'm very serious. As of this morning, the court has received the petition for divorce, and we've submitted a temporary restraining order which includes this property as a protected space. You are no longer permitted to approach or contact Rachel directly." Claire grinned. "You heard her. That means both of you need to leave." Melissa turned to Eric. "Do something." Eric's hands curled into fists. He looked at Rachel like he was still waiting for her to back down. To explain. To apologize. But Rachel didn't move. She took one small measured step forward. And then she said the words that had been building inside her for years. "I'm not yours anymore." Eric blinked. As if he'd never imagined a world where she got to say that. Sarah pulled a folded document from her folder and handed it to him. "This is your copy of the initial filing. I suggest you read it carefully. You'll be hearing from me soon." Eric stared at it but didn't take it. Instead, he turned to Rachel one last time. "You think you're stronger than me?" he asked, voice low, bitter. Rachel met his gaze without flinching. No, she said softly. I know I am. Melissa muttered something under her breath and tugged at Eric's sleeve. He hesitated a moment longer but finally turned and walked back to the car. As the engine roared to life and the car pulled away, Rachel stood rooted in place, shoulders trembling. Claire stepped beside her and wrapped an arm around her waist. You did it, she whispered. Sarah gave a quiet smile. You made your stand, Rachel. That's no small thing. Rachel turned to face them both. I thought I'd feel terrified, she said. But all I feel is light. Not empty. Not broken. Just light. Like the weight of someone else's expectations had finally been lifted from her chest. Like she had walked through fire and come out on the other side whole. The days after the confrontation passed in a fog of paperwork, court filings, and cautious relief. Rachel felt like she was moving through water each step, slow, deliberate, necessary. But when the adrenaline faded, the quiet came. And with it a different kind of ache. She had faced Eric. She had said the words, I'm not yours anymore. But healing wasn't as simple as declaring freedom. She still startled at loud voices. She still woke in the night, her body curled in defense before her mind could register she was safe. She still caught herself apologizing to Claire for taking up space, for needing help, for existing. One morning, after seeing Rachel flinch at the sound of a slammed cabinet, Claire handed her a flyer. You don't have to go, she said. But this helped me once. After everything with my mom. Rachel looked at the paper. It was for a women's support group. Thursday evenings. Church basement. No judgment, just space. She almost tossed it. Instead, she folded it and slipped it into her pocket. That Thursday, she went. The room was dimly lit and smelled faintly of coffee and furniture polish. 10 chairs formed a circle. There were no name tags, no introductions beyond first names. Just a quiet invitation to speak or not. Rachel listened the first night. Listened as women talked about marriages that began with roses and ended in broken glass. About being told you're too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. About losing themselves in the name of love. There was one woman, Judith, in her 60s with silver hair tied in a long braid. She sat with a calm that felt like wisdom. At one point, when a younger woman broke down mid-sentence, saying she felt like a failure because she hadn't left sooner, Judith reached over and took her hand. Healing doesn't look like a straight line, she said gently. Sometimes it circles back, sometimes it stands still. But as long as you're here, you're moving. Rachel didn't speak that night, but she cried, quietly behind her hands, and no one looked away. That night she started writing again. Not a novel, not a blog post. Just her truth. Scrawled in blue ink across the pages of a leather-bound journal Claire had left on her pillow with a note. When you're ready. She wrote about the day Eric threw coffee at her. About how she'd stayed quiet not just that morning but for years. She wrote about the ache of being erased a little at a time until she couldn't recognize herself in the mirror. She filled 3 pages the first night, 5 the next, 10 by the end of the week. And something strange happened in the writing. Her voice returned. It wasn't loud yet, but it was hers. She also began reaching out. To friends she hadn't spoken to in years. To the college roommate she'd ghosted after Eric had accused her of being a bad influence. To the coworkers she'd left without goodbye when he said the office politics were toxic. She wrote emails not to explain everything but to say, I'm sorry. I lost myself for a while. I'm trying to come back. Some didn't respond. But most did. With kindness. With stories of their own. With invitations for coffee, for walks, for new beginnings. It was like finding fragments of herself in other people's inboxes. One afternoon, Rachel was walking back from the bookstore when she saw her old neighbor from across the street, Mrs. Dupree. An older woman with sharp eyes and a tighter mouth who used to prune her roses like she was performing surgery. Rachel instinctively tensed. But Mrs. Dupree surprised her. I heard, she said, not unkindly. About Eric. About the divorce. Rachel nodded. Yeah, it's a lot. There was a pause. Then Mrs. Dupree's side eyes softening. I used to hear things, you know. Through the walls. Arguments. Crashing. I should have said something. Rachel blinked, stunned. I told myself it wasn't my place. That it was private. Mrs. Dupree's jaw tightened. But silence is how it keeps going. If you ever need someone to speak on your behalf to the court, to anyone, you let me know. I'll do it. Rachel's throat tightened. I will, she said quietly. Thank you. As the woman walked away, Rachel stood on the sidewalk for a long time, staring up at the sky. It was overcast. Ordinary. But to her it felt like hope. Not all wounds heal in secret. Some need light, some need witness. And some need community, not to rescue you, but to remind you that your voice matters. That your silence was never your fault. That healing doesn't begin when you forget the pain, but when you start to name it. Rachel pressed a hand to her chest. For the first time in years, it didn't hurt to feel herself breathe. The bell above the bookstore door gave a soft chime as Rachel stepped inside for her first shift. The cozy nook was nestled between a florist and a bakery downtown, and it always smelled faintly of vanilla and rain-damp paper. The shelves leaned gently as if in mid-conversation, and the floor creaked with a kind of honesty that reminded her of the old house she grew up in. Every corner was filled with something that whispered, "You belong here." Claire's cousin Megan ran the place with the calm of someone who understood the world was better when people had stories to lose themselves in. She didn't ask Rachel for a resume. She only said, "Start Monday. We'll see how it feels." It felt right. There was something healing in the quiet rituals, shelving new arrivals, dusting off old hardcovers, recommending memoirs to lost teenagers. She learned the regulars, Mr. Willoughby, who only bought westerns, the newlywed couple arguing in the poetry aisle, the single mom looking for anything that might make her daughter laugh again. Each person a chapter. Each interaction, a page. Rachel began to carry a notebook in her apron pocket. She jotted down sentences she overheard, bits of dialogue, ideas for essays she wasn't sure she was brave enough to write yet. But it was a beginning. One afternoon, as she was shelving fiction, her fingers brushed across a familiar spine. The Awakening by Kate Chopin. She pulled it down slowly. It had been years, college, maybe since she last read it. She remembered loving it then, but this time felt different. She wasn't just revisiting a novel, she was revisiting herself. She brought it home, curled under a blanket Claire's daughter had outgrown, and read late into the night. When she reached Edna Pontellier's words, "I would give up the unessential. But I wouldn't give myself," Rachel broke. Tears she didn't expect welled in her throat and spilled down her cheeks. Not from sadness. Not entirely. But from recognition. From the ache of having once given herself away piece by piece and the quiet awe of knowing she never would again. She closed the book and whispered aloud to the silence of the guest room, "I wouldn't give myself again. Never again." The words rang like a vow. That week she found her old laptop buried in the bottom of her suitcase. Its battery was dying and the screen flickered at the edges, but it still worked. Like her, battered, imperfect, but not broken. She didn't start with anything grand. No memoir, no novel. Just a story. The story of a woman who lost her voice inside a quiet house filled with unspoken rules, who mistook control for love. Who left when she realized silence was killing her more slowly than pain. Rachel wrote until the sun came up. She wasn't writing for an audience or approval or catharsis. She was writing because it reminded her of who she used to be and who she was becoming. Every paragraph she typed felt like reclaiming territory. Her voice, her mind, her right to name her life. The bookstore became her sanctuary, her journal, her map, her stories, her compass. Sometimes she'd still wake up afraid. Healing wasn't magic. But every morning when she tied her apron at the cozy nook, when she slid open her notebook and picked up her pen, she remembered. She wasn't rebuilding a life from scratch, she was rewriting the one that had always been hers. The courtroom was colder than Rachel expected. Not physically, but emotionally sterile, formal, stripped of the warmth she'd spent months rebuilding. She sat quietly beside Sarah, palms flat against her skirt, heart thudding like a steady drumbeat of memory. Eric sat across from her, perfectly pressed suit, smirk painted like armor. Melissa was beside him, arms crossed and expression smug, as if this was just another shopping trip she planned to win. Rachel focused on the wood grain of the table. On breathing. On staying steady. Then the judge entered and the proceedings began. Melissa was the first to speak. She launched into her accusations with flair and venom, weaving a story about how Rachel had stormed off with cash that belonged to the household, how she'd been irrational, emotionally unstable, and financially manipulative. She emptied the joint account, Melissa claimed dramatically, and left my brother with nothing. She's been hoarding money behind his back, hiding it in lockboxes. Rachel didn't flinch, but she felt the burn rise in her throat. Eric added in his usual measured tone, "This was never supposed to go this far. Rachel just got lost. She needs help, not a divorce." Sarah didn't move, she waited, then stood. "Your Honor," Sarah said, "we'd like to submit 4 pieces of evidence for the court's consideration." She clicked her laptop. The screen beside the judge lit up. First, a time-stamped video security footage from a neighboring porch camera. It showed Eric yelling on the lawn the night Rachel left, pacing like a caged animal. In one clip, the sound of him shouting, "She'll regret this," was crystal clear. Next, medical records. The burns on Rachel's cheek, treated at an urgent care facility. Photos included. Then a notarized letter from Mrs. Dupree, the neighbor who stated under oath that she'd heard shouts, crashes, and demeaning language consistently for years coming from the Campbell home. Finally, Sarah placed a small black leather journal on the table. "Rachel's excerpts," Sarah said, "provided voluntarily, showing a clear pattern of emotional manipulation, isolation, and control." The courtroom was silent. Even Melissa shifted uncomfortably. Eric opened his mouth, closed it. The judge leaned forward. "Do you deny throwing scalding coffee at your wife, Mr. Campbell?" Eric's lips pressed thin. "It was an accident." "And the emotional abuse?" He didn't answer. The silence said enough. The judge's ruling came at noon. Rachel would retain sole ownership of the house. All shared assets were to be divided in her favor due to proven patterns of abuse and coercive control. Melissa whispered something to Eric, something sharp and panicked, but he didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the bench, on the ruling that had dismantled his power. Rachel stood slowly. Her legs felt steady. As she gathered her things, she turned and looked at him one last time. The man who once held her future in the curl of his fingers. And then calmly, she said, "This is the last time I ever let you define me." Eric blinked. Like he didn't understand what he had lost until it stared him in the face. But Rachel wasn't waiting for understanding. She walked out of that courtroom not as a woman who had been broken, but as one who had survived. And who now finally belonged only to herself. The keys jingled in her hand like bells of freedom. Rachel stepped into the apartment, her apartment with cautious reverence, as if even the walls were listening. It was nothing extravagant, a second-floor walk-up with creaky stairs, peeling baseboards, and sunlight that pooled generously across the wooden floor. But it was hers. No one else's name on the lease. No one else's rules. No silence hanging in the air like punishment. Just space. Just air. Just beginning. She stood in the center of the room for a long moment, letting the quiet settle, then whispered out loud to no one in particular, "I made it." The days that followed were a slow, sacred ceremony of rebuilding. She thrifted furniture, painted walls in warm, grounding colors. Framed pictures she had once hidden in drawers, old friends, beach, sunsets, scribbled poems. She placed a pot of lavender on the windowsill. Bought mismatched mugs on purpose. Each decision was an act of defiance. Each corner became a statement, "I choose this. I get to choose now." Claire arrived one weekend with a housewarming gift wrapped in brown paper. Rachel opened it to find a handcrafted wooden plaque with calligraphy burned into the grain. "This is mine. All of it." Rachel blinked back tears. "It's perfect." Claire just smiled. "So is what you're building." But Rachel didn't just want a life. She wanted to use her voice. It began as a blog post. Late one night, with chamomile tea beside her and the rain ticking softly against the window, she opened her laptop and wrote the title, "How I Left the House Where I Lost Myself." She didn't name Eric. Or Melissa. Or even the town. She just told the truth. How love turned quiet. How quiet turned heavy. How heavy turned violent. She didn't dramatize. didn't beg for sympathy. She wrote like she was bleeding onto the keyboard, not to be rescued, but to release. When she clicked publish, she nearly closed the browser immediately. But within hours, the post had been shared over 4,000 times. The next day, her inbox overflowed with messages. Some long. Some just a single line. Thank you. You put into words what I've lived in silence. I thought I was crazy, but I'm not. You reminded me I'm not. You gave me the courage to finally pack the suitcase. Rachel read every word with trembling hands. She cried. Then she smiled. This wasn't just healing anymore, it was purpose. Over the next few weeks she wrote more. Stories of breaking, yes, but also of reclaiming. Of the first night she slept without fear. Of the way coffee tasted when she made it for herself, just the way she liked. Of the children's books she read at the cozy nook and the women in her support group who held each other without shame. Her writing found its rhythm. Raw but lyrical, soft but unflinching. It didn't take long for an idea to bloom a bigger one. One morning after finishing a post titled, "The Mirror and the Mug," Rachel opened a blank document and typed in bold the line in the sand, "A memoir of leaving, losing, and finding myself again." She stared at the screen for a long time. Then, like striking the first match in a long winter, she began to type. Not because she wanted revenge. Not because she needed validation. But because her story wasn't just hers anymore. It was a lighthouse. And somewhere out there someone was still in the storm waiting to see the light. A year had passed since the courtroom. Since the coffee. Since the silence. Since the storm. Rachel stood backstage, palms slightly damp, heart steady. She wasn't nervous, not in the way she used to be. This wasn't fear, it was energy. Purpose. Readiness. A volunteer peeked behind the curtain. "You're on in 2. Rachel nodded, smoothed the hem of her navy dress, and took a breath that reached deep into the part of her that once forgot how to breathe freely. In the front row sat Claire, flanked by Emma and Jack, their legs too short to touch the ground but their eyes wide with pride. Next to them Sarah Thatcher crossed one leg over the other and gave Rachel a quiet, knowing smile. Rachel stepped into the spotlight. The room was full, dozens of women from all walks of life. Some alone, some with friends, some with fresh bruises, others with only the invisible kind. All of them survivors. All of them searching for something. Rachel adjusted the mic. "Hi. My name is Rachel Harper." The room held its breath. A year ago, I wouldn't have imagined standing here. Back then, I didn't believe I had anything worth saying. I believed what I had been taught, that my value was in being someone's wife, someone's caretaker, someone's silence. She paused. But silence is not strength, and love without respect is not love at all. Heads nodded slowly. She shared her story, not as a confession, not as a warning, but as a bridge. She told them about the kitchen that smelled like bitterness. About the coffee. About the house that stopped being a home. But she also told them about the bookstore, the support group, the journal that turned into a lifeline. She told them about finding her voice one sentence at a time. And she did it without crying. Not because the story wasn't painful, but because it no longer owned her. At the end of her talk, the lights dimmed slightly. Rachel looked out at the sea of faces, women who had lost, who had left, who had survived. She smiled. "I once thought I needed to be someone's wife to have worth," she said, voice strong and clear. Then a pause. A breath. A truth. "Now I know I only ever needed to be mine." Applause erupted, not just in volume but in spirit, not just polite but visceral. A release. A celebration. A collective heartbeat saying, "Yes, we see you. We hear you. We are you." Rachel stepped down from the stage into Claire's embrace. "I'm so proud of you." Claire whispered, tears brimming but not falling. "Me too," Rachel said softly. Finally. Later that evening, Rachel sat by the window of her apartment, now filled with small things that told big stories: books, candles, letters from readers, drafts of her memoir. The line in the sand was nearly complete. A publisher had reached out. A podcast had requested an interview. Another woman had written to say she left yesterday because of Rachel's words. The ripple was real. She turned on her lamp, opened her laptop, and began to type the final chapter of her book. Outside, the city hummed with possibility. Inside, Rachel's fingers danced across the keys, not because she had to, not because anyone was watching, but because she